Good evening and welcome to the second Google Hangout on the outstanding MOOC with HT2. I'm Sam Burrow and I'm joined by Craig Taylor, Joe Cook, and Saskia. Sorry, Saskia, I haven't got your surname in front of me. But thank you all for joining us. And this evening we're going to talk, reflect a bit back on the latest sort of goings on in the MOOC, as we generally do, and also we're going to talk a bit more about the kind of design requirements for creating a MOOC, or generally just creating something on Curatr, to be honest. So you don't have to think in terms of hundreds and thousands of participants. But it's we've got to that point in Outstanding MOOC now where if you've progressed far enough, you have the option of getting your own Curatr account to go and create your own course of some sort. Anything goes. So it makes sense that we start looking at that side of things now. So I'm with a couple of people who are at that stage. So Joe, you've been blogging about your design process and what you've been doing to prepare for actually putting stuff into Curatr. Do you want to just kind of fill us in a bit for those that haven't read your blog as to what you've been up to?
Absolutely. So I've really enjoyed looking at the theory and the principles behind the MOOC and how to put that together and kind of broadening that out to online courses as well, rather than what has to be labelled as a MOOC. And what I've started doing then is thinking, like on last Friday, I was going, right, okay, what I'm going to do is spend the whole of today putting my MOOC together on Curatr. It'll be really fun, really exciting. I'm going to put the objects in and decide my questions. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, I haven't actually decided what I want to do. I've got my topic, but I'm going to make the same mistake that we always make, which is jump in feet first and not actually plan it. And so I thought, well, I'll have to plan something out. And the way that I've done a lot of planning in the past is with something called action mapping, which Kathy Moore developed, which is an absolutely brilliant process that you can use in really great depth for any kind of learning initiative or any kind of problem presented to the training department. But also you can use it like I did in a really top level fashion and just focus on what does the business need out of this and what are the people going to physically do at work. Therefore, what do I need to create in whatever my learning intervention might be. So I found that really useful to help shape my thinking, which then led to kind of actually this is probably the different levels in the MOOC, and these are probably some of the questions that I need to be asking and find the right content for that.
And is that any different to how you would design any kind of learning intervention?
I think it really depends on what you're designing and who you're designing it with. So in my world, I'd love to do proper, decent action mapping for every type of intervention that I'm doing. But we were discussing before we went on air, I'm freelance, so I then have to work within the framework of whatever my clients want to do. So if they don't do action mapping or they have something else, it could be performance support, it could be whatever process, I go in line with that, with a balance of, well, this is my experience of what's worked really well, or kind of insight and thinking, gosh, you're really not focusing on this or this, and maybe kind of that consultancy piece can really help with that. So it just depends on how that goes. But the focus of what does the business need and what are people going to do, that's certainly what I try and bring to every project, yeah.
Cool. Saskia, what kind of, how far have you got with your early stages of design?
Yes, I've worked out my English is not so good. I worked out the big framework. So I now have got the chapters, and the next step is finding the content with the chapters. I've also started to formulate the goals of the different chapters. Maybe you've seen it in the blog. I want to try and make it an experience that's more than only be a good participant in a MOOC, also goes to the 20th century skills and what MOOCs learning is all about.
Great. And how are you finding that process so far? Is it different to how you may have worked in with a non-MOOC design project?
Similar. Starting with the framework and the goals, That's what we always do, making e-learning. But the difference is the small chunked bits. So that's new.
And in terms of the actual content that you're going to put in there, have you got as far as that? Are you looking to create content, or are you going to focus more on curated content?
Yeah, more curated content.
And have you got to that stage yet, or are you just kind of identifying what it is you're looking for?
I'm going to do that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the case for me.
Cool. Well, I should take a moment to welcome loads of people who have joined us in the last couple of minutes. Robin, Nick, Paul, Nick again, and Marika. Thank you all for joining us. So we're just talking about the sort of design process for creating MOOC-style learning. Has anyone else on the call got as far as working with Curatr and starting to design something themselves? No. Someone, I think there's someone's got one of their children in the background having a chat, so you might want to pop yourself on mute. So, Robin, thank you for joining us there. How have you been finding the MOOC so far? What sort of stood out to you?
I think really the mixture of the various different types of content, I think the fact that it's not all video has been useful for me, because not just because I don't like video, I love video, it's just that it's not always easy to listen to video. Sometimes you want to use this stuff while you're out and about or on the train or things like that. And so that mix of materials is really helpful. And I think it gives you an opportunity as well to reread things, go back over them in a way that perhaps you don't tend to with video, because it's much more difficult to find those little bits and pieces that you've been looking at. So for me, I think the mixture of text, some of the academic stuff I've really liked, and the blogs, and I'm just starting to get into screencasts as I'm following that latter section of it. So that's a new one on me as well. So those things are quite interesting.
Cool. Nick, how about you? What about the last week? How's that been for you?
Which Nick?
Oh, whichever Nick speaks first, you.
You walked into that one. Shall I go? Glasses, yeah. Nick.
Go for it, glasses, Nick.
Well, I haven't really, I don't know if you caught a tweet today, but basically I've not got very far in the whole design process, because I obviously just want to kind of mentally map it out. I think the thing for me that I'm finding quite tricky, and it's probably because whether I've not really read into this enough or looked into kind of other MOOC design techniques, is just this thing about, you know, this is not instructional design as we know it in terms of e-learning. It's nothing like that at all. You know, we're engineering social, and for me, it's about what I'm finding really difficult is because I haven't really got an organisation to map this against. If I did, I think I would struggle to really align it to kind of business objectives. I don't think I'd find it too difficult, but it's just that notion of actually how important is it to align it to business objectives? Do we have to be covert about it when we're trying to engineer social? Because I'm not in that environment right now, I think I'm just trying to see, well, is that always the challenge when it comes to designing MOOCs? I don't know if it is a challenge or it should exist or not.
I think it depends on the level of social, the emphasis you're putting on the social, really. What do other people think? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I think from my perspective, the idea of having a business objective or a business need to design around is really quite an interesting discipline. So from my perspective, although I don't think it's necessarily a requirement that the MOOCs need to be focused around a business leader, you can just put stuff out there and say, hey, look at this stuff that I've created and what do people think about it, which is good enough, I think. But I like the discipline of wanting to try and address a particular issue within an organisation. And I'm talking to a couple of organisations at the moment about how we might be able to do that using either this platform or this pedagogical kind of approach as a way of really getting not so much initial introduction to material, but very definitely about reinforcement of the material that they might have encountered through other mechanisms, whether that's e-learning or that's face-to-face combination of the two. But really to take this stuff back into the everyday and integrate that as seamlessly as you can into the work that they do.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of phrases we've used to describe these is structured social learning experiences. So it's not like like enterprise social networking, which can be focused on projects or teams or just general, but it's actually, well, here is the thing that people.
Sam, your mic's off.
Sorry, what happened there? I didn't press that. But yeah, I think it's this idea of control, really, and how much we feel we need to control the social interaction, and how much we're sort of happy to let things go. Does anyone have any? Has anyone sort of got any examples of where they've used more social, created more kind of social learning experiences, and what kind of things work? What kind of topics is that suitable for in your experience?
I think, Sam, when I worked at Bupa a few years ago, there was a new product that was about to be launched, a new James product, and the traditional way of rolling that out would have been e-learning or classroom type sheep dip type of activity. And I took a very different approach. They had a great social platform called Jive within the business, and it was one of the best enterprise social networks I've ever seen in use. I don't know what they did. I don't know if they really did anything or if it was just a culture there, but it was incredibly well used for both business purposes, personal purposes, and the full spectrum in between. And I actually used that to deliver the training around this product. It was very different for Boop, and I think perhaps for some people it was a step too far. But I was a big believer in going where the energy was and going where, learning is where the eye is. And there were lots of people having lots of conversations in that particular platform, so I decided to use it for that particular reason, to deliver this product launch training.
And how did you go about that? Was it? I mean, I kind of imagine it's not massively dissimilar to what you've got in Curatr, which is you use some sort of content and you start some conversations with it.
Yeah, it was. It was. They had a great performance support tool, which I think was called Knowledge Point, but it might not have been. But they had this great portal where basically all of the information that they needed about the product, the variations, the clauses, everything was in. As you might imagine in insurance, everything was written down and it was all in this portal. It's just that not a lot of people, but there were occasions where people didn't use it. They thought they knew best. They thought they could remember the clause. So they didn't tend to rely on that. They tended to rely, unfortunately, on their memory, and it led to problems. So what I did was I created some scenarios within this social platform. In fact, I think Joe might have actually helped me voice record one of them. But we recorded some spoof voicemails that they might expect to receive from real callers, asking questions about the product, not naming it explicitly, but giving enough away that it was pretty obvious this was the product that they were looking for, but also asking some questions that touched on the risk areas with this product or the nuances with this product. So we basically set up the challenge for them, and it was a challenge, and there was no way people were going to get it right just by luck. There were too many variations involved. And then we almost did a very simple throwaway obvious thing, but we said, here's the challenge, and here's the link to go to support point to find the answer. We're not going to tell you where it is, but we're going to send you to the right section. So we gave them the challenge. We showed them where they could find the answer. It wasn't a closed book test. Dealing with a real caller isn't a closed book environment. So we were within this social environment. We were modelling the very behaviour that we wanted people to follow, which was to use the damn support material and stop relying on your memory. It went down well. There were one or two challenges with it, and those challenges were once you submitted your answer, unlike Curatr where you can hide that answer, or unlike Curatr where everybody's response might be hidden until you've submitted yours, unfortunately you could see everybody's previous responses, which weren't necessarily right, they weren't necessarily wrong, but it was a slight flaw in the plan that you could see what other people had submitted before you submitted yours. So that, of course, might have influenced your response.
Yeah, I guess that is one of the advantages of using a dedicated learning platform for something like that, than rather than your sort of current enterprise social network. Do you think, it sounds like that was already quite a thriving community? I was watching your video earlier today on your reflections of week 2, and you were sort of just reflecting on whether or not it was necessary to be such a busy bee with all the kind of welcoming, and if you hadn't done that, would things have started the way they did? Would there be as many conversations? So do you think, any more thoughts on that? Is that necessary, do you think, to be quite so hectic?
I still don't know, and I'd love to have the opportunity and the time and the resource to do some A/B testing with it, but who does? So I don't know. What I do know is that, speaking about Bupa's platform, when they launched it, there were no rules. There were no, I mean, the usual rules about swearing and being respectful, but there was no overt policies or guidelines or procedures so it evolved. It found its own feet. It found its own way. There were no rules about it's got to be for business. In fact, I think initially it wasn't. I think they took quite a clever route and allowed people to see the benefit of this place to be able to talk and connect and solve problems. Even if the problem was, I'm looking for a new member for my band, they allowed them to see how they could solve a problem, and then gradually it turned into a business enterprise social model once people were hooked on the value. In fact, the first 12 months of its launch, at the end of that 12 months, they did an awards evening, and the most prolific user / blogger / voted up person was the managing director at that time. And they were genuinely his comments. They weren't what his PA or team had done. They were his comments and his interactions. So I think there was a huge element of role modelling and leading from the front and demonstrating good practice, which probably goes towards what I was trying to do in week 1, which was that, hopefully all of us, all around us, were modelling that good practice and giving people the permission to do that. So I don't know is the answer to it. I don't think I ever will know if week 1 would have been just as successful if we'd said little or nothing, but I think it would have been a dangerous to have trodden perhaps. I don't know. What do other people think?
I think there's a lot of, you hear about certainly communities or MOOCs being like, I think Jane Hart, or either Jane or Harold, is it Jarsh? I don't know if I pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
They talk about, MOOCs are like, the people who set up the MOOCs are, you're setting up a theatre, you're not the actors in it, everyone who participates in that are the actors. Or I think Jane Hart talks about, it's a bit like a landlord and a pub, those sort of analogies. But I think just going back to what Craig, you were saying, it's about this thing about, communities are about trust. And I think about, the whole fact that, yes, you could have 250,000 conversations going on, and they might be about who wants to join my band, but there is going to be that one moment, that one conversation that's going to happen, that's going to spark something that is related to the business. And I think, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about this, not a concern, but about how we map this against business objectives, if at all. And I think obviously when we're trying to kind of sell ourselves to L&D, to the business and what value we bring, my thing here is I just want to, obviously businesses are looking at us and saying, okay, MOOCs are great, but how does this relate back to the business? And it's almost like engineering that conversation with senior leadership. Say, do you know what? This might not be about business objectives. It might be, but don't expect it to happen overnight. Communities take time, and the conversations that will happen within that community will take time. But you've got to trust it to, at some stage, whether it's 3 months, 3 days, 3 weeks down the line, something will happen that will spark something that is related to the business, and it will go from there. And it's that building of trust within the organisation.
I really agree with that, and I think one of the things, kind of going back to Craig's example of Bupa, because that's where I met Craig, because I worked with him, is actually some of the stuff that's on any kind of enterprise social network or MOOC, as you've described previously, where you had a course as a MOOC and then you opened it up and people still use it as a resource. is that actually those conversations mature over time. And because they're there, you can reference back to them. When I was developing work at Bupa, I was going back to conversations that sometimes were a year old or 2 years old, and maybe the conversation was out of date, maybe it wasn't, but they were a really good starting point to go to the business and say, hey, Bob, you wrote this. Have you got up-to-date information, or who is the person to go and ask? Or just the information was there, the link was there, and I could find the up-to-date policy, process, product, whatever it was. So I think those conversations, just like any relationship, matures over time, and that can happen in your MOOC or your enterprise social network as well.
Do you think they're a good platform for talent? I mean, talent's just this deep mired word. It's such a simple word to say, but everyone's got their own take on it. But in terms of being able to identify who knows a lot about a certain subject, or who's giving good answers on a certain subject, or what group of people tend to be, do you think that they're a good, and this is open to everyone, not just jokes, I responded, do you think that from a talent perspective, a talent pipeline, talent identification, they're a useful tool to have?
One of the comments that I put in one of the earlier responses, I think it was in week 2, was really telling the story about LV's use of essentially a social platform. They have a thing called Resolve, which is the question site. And I referenced it in relation to the video about the BT site. The idea there is that people post questions and anybody can answer them, but an expert will definitely answer them within 24 hours. Now, if it's already been answered and the expert thinks that's a pretty good answer, then that one gets marked as the correct answer. And people can vote things up and mark them in that way. Once you've answered a few, and I can't remember exactly how many it is, you become a Resolve Pro. And when you're a Resolve Pro, you're allowed to mark the answers of other people, and you're also allowed to give definitive answers on issues. Now, this is insurance and financial services, so there's huge compliance issues, there's huge potential risk if the wrong answers are out there. And what they've used that for is 2 things. If people are giving the wrong answers, then they've recognised maybe there's a learning need that they need to resolve, particularly if it's around one subject and nobody's getting the answers right. And the second thing is the people who are giving the answers right are then identified as people who might want to be involved in other projects and other activities. And so they get involved in projects with directors of the business or special working groups and all sorts of things. So there's all sorts of ways in which they get recognised for doing that, not just that they get called the Resolve Pro, which is nice in and of itself, but it's really about identifying the people who've A, got some real understanding of the subjects that are being dealt with on the phones by the people who are calling in. This is specifically around the first notification of loss area. So this is where, if you handle the call right, you keep a customer. And if you handle the call right, you keep a customer and it doesn't cost you a lot of money. And, you know, insurance is necessarily a mix there between the idea of giving good advice and supporting customers to achieve the outcome that they want, while at the same time protecting the income of the organisation. So those things are essential and necessary. And that process of identifying people through the Resolve system has been, you know, really, really useful and has saved them loads and loads of money of people giving wrong advice and not getting the outcomes that they want. So, you know, I think it's been a terrific opportunity, but it's a very, very focused process. And the important thing is every question is looked at by an expert within 24 hours. And so that is the way in which you can get people to really use those systems. Because we've all seen question sites and forums which are, you know, populated exclusively by tumbleweed and the smell of despair is apparent. You know, those things happen. And how do you get around that? You get around it by making it the place you go to get that information. And that's when they work.
Thank you, Robin. Appreciate you. Yeah, I do recall you posting that in the earlier part of the MOOC. So thank you for surfacing it here as well and perhaps giving it a new audience. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good story. Do you think, though, because we're talking quite a bit really about enterprise social networks now, do you think there is a fundamental difference, though? Do we need to make a distinction between what happens in a MOOC, which is essentially a course and is time-bound, a time-bound community, and these kind of more ongoing communities in businesses? Is it important to distinguish between the two?
I think so, she says, jumping in first, because it's kind of the difference between training and communication. And that might not necessarily be the right answer for all people in all places, but it's about having, I think, a more specific purpose and a more of a scaffold or structure and support around it, as opposed to go off and do whatever you like on the social network and use it in whatever personal or business way is appropriate. Just a thought.
I think from my perspective, it's a crossover, isn't it? I think, as I say, I've been working with creating online communities of one sort or another now for about 15 years, and most of them have quite honestly been pants. I mean, they have just been rubbish. Nobody uses them beyond the first 3 weeks. And you go in there 6 months after it's been launched, and there is these empty comments about, gee, I'm really looking forward to this network allowing us to share information. Last post, sometime around about April. And it's just disheartening that people don't use that tool, and they prefer to use email, they prefer to ring up their friends, let their friends know anything about the subject is another issue. So there's no real opportunity to kind of surface the kind of institutional information within there. And sometimes I think it just needs this bit more structure, and this is what I'm really looking forward to exploring with the MOOC that I'm hoping to create over the course of the next week or so, is this idea of, can we create some structure which really engages people in that conversation, and then the conversation carries on. Now, I've voiced skepticism about whether or not the conversation carries on in the past, and I will continue to be skeptical until I see it happen, really. But I do think that my experience of just putting a platform where people can share stuff hasn't worked terribly well. So I'm really hoping that this is going to give people a real model of this is how it can be beneficial, and see if we can get people involved and engaged.
As a closing question, because I'm very mindful of everybody's time, Robin's just mentioned there about a scaffolding to engage and to encourage and to hopefully prolong the conversation. I'd be really interested in hearing from, hopefully, everybody that's on the call today. Is there anything that you've seen in this MOOC that you're in at the moment, or indeed any MOOC actually, is there anything you've seen in a MOOC that you want to try and replicate, duplicate, model, mirror, take a slice of for the MOOC that you're planning to build in the next week or two, or indeed even if you're not planning to build a MOOC, because I know not everybody is, anything that you try to take away to implement into what you're doing back in the mainstream, back into what you're doing in the business. And I'm asking that because one of the things that we wanted to get out of today's Hangout, we mentioned it right at the beginning, is to help people make that transition between the first 2 weeks when we looked at the theory and some ideas and some good practice, what's happening later this week and next week, the building. There's obviously got to be a phase where we take that and put it into practice and design it. So that's my reference for asking the question, really. Would anyone like to start us off, and is there a key thing that you've seen in any MOOC that you're going to try and replicate, and why?
Obviously a good question. Nobody's answering it great. I think the one thing that I've seen is the opportunity to ask different types of questions. So the questions that you've been asking, and this is obviously in your design, is here's a question for people who've done MOOCs before and have got more experience of this stuff, and here's a question for people for whom this is their very first MOOC. And I really like that idea. I've not seen that in other MOOCs that I've been involved in and used before. So my idea of having differentiated questions at the same point of where the comments are requested is the one that I'm going to take in.
Thank you, Robin. Appreciate that, and hopefully that will that'll make sense to other people as well. Thank you. Anybody else?
Craig, one thing I've seen, well, you've probably all seen, is, and I don't really know how this would sit within a MOOC, but this thing about, I know within video you can obviously jump to a section that you might go, well, I'll fast forward this bit, but you've probably seen within videos that you can actually, within that, put placeholders within the video itself that says, if you want to go directly to, let's say, this chapter of the video, so i.e. it'll take you to minute 3 of a 6-minute video, you can click on it and it'll take you direct there. And it's kind of, it's the first, let's say there's 3 sections on the actual video, and the first bit will be introduction, number 1, and then it will say number 2, I don't know,
So
or whatever it might be, and it's just a way of easily bookmarking the video, as it were. So as opposed to you kind of scrolling through the video to get to the bit you want, you actually just click on a kind of animated button. It doesn't have to be animated, but some sort of bookmark that you click on. It just caters for those people who probably, I think, as you mentioned last week, it's difficult to gauge your learners with something like this. So to kind of satisfy their appetites, it's kind of a way of bookmarking on the video and say, look, if you don't want to know about the introduction on this bit, just go here and it will take you to this bit of the video. There
is actually a free tool that you can get to do that. There's a relatively new technology called H5P. If you go to h5p.org, I think you need to have a content management system to host the. It'll work on WordPress or Joomla or Drupal, I think, and you basically install the plugin, and then you can download. There's about 20 or 30 different interactions, and they actually work in Curatr. You can embed them in Curatr, and one of them is an interactive video tool. So you can it's quite. It's a fairly new technology. It's been developed by learning technologists in Norway, I think, but it's got a whole range of different things which really give you a massive toolbox of things that you can put in something like Curatr. And one of the more interesting ones is the video. So you can have that kind of timeline thing, but you can also make it stop at those points and pose a question. So it's really quite powerful.
I also think what the useful tool I've seen with Coursera, brilliantly simple, but it's just the ability to speed up the transition of the video, not fast forward as such, but just to be able to kind of get people to speak twice as quickly or 2.5 times as quickly. And it sounds like it would come out like a chipmunk, but actually I found it really, really useful to be able to take in the content of the video far quicker, and to me it's never detracted from me being able to absorb it. So that's, again, brilliantly simple, but something like that might be of use as well. And they're doing that on the, Sam, you've probably seen that on the Future Learn courses. So you've got that tool set available to you, as you say, Craig, to forward it 1.5, 2 times.
Yeah, they have it on
which is a neat
lynda.com
feature as well. Yeah. Any other closing observations that people have made about any MOOC in general that they'll try and either feed into the MOOC that they're building over the next couple of weeks, or just generally feed into their practice moving forward, regardless whether it's a MOOC or a closed program or anything that they're doing?
Yeah, for me it's around the quality of the questions. So it's around making sure that the activity element of what people are doing is really thinking about what they're going to do with their own practice and whatever your subject is. And I found myself rewriting my questions sometimes 4 or 5 or 6 times to get to the point of what I want them to think about or do or act upon. And some of them I've written specifically, like Robin said, to be kind of quite small or quite deep, depending on how you want to react. You can just put, yeah, it's cool, or you can go into a lot more depth. And actually, I've noticed a lot of people doing that throughout the MOOC that we've done. Some people, like me, are quite gobby and write loads, and other people kind of want to sit back and just take it in, and that's everybody's personal learning journey as well as being a social learning journey as well. So I think that's something I'm keeping in mind.
Thank you, Joe. Any more before we kind of, Sam, I guess, wraps it up?
Great. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. That's been a really interesting chat, and it's great to have so many different faces and voices on one of these. Maybe we'll get even more next week, and it will be really hard to manage. But no, it's great to have such a good range of voices and interesting discussion. We'll be back on the MOOC as usual for the rest of the week and the next couple of weeks, and there'll be another Twitter chat on Thursday if any of you can make it who are watching. So thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.